in numerous Super Bowls. So how about a guy that has played in a couple Super Bowls and a guy who has won a Super Bowl? And again, I actually thought the team that Joe Theismann had the following year, I actually thought that team was better than the one that won the Super Bowl. And let's get to the former NFL MVP now and get his thoughts here. How you doing, Joe?
Hi, Danny. How are you?
Thank you so much for finding time for me, Joe.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out. So I'm in a hotel room where I seem to be spending all my life. So anyway, here I am, and here we are. Hopefully, it's okay.
Fantastic. Joe, what I just said about Super Bowl experience, is it a media thing? Do you think it's overhyped? Give me your sense, because you've been to two of them. You won one, you lost one. Is that a media-made thing, or is there something to it?
Well, I'll quote the great Dwayne Thomas. It's just another game. That was the way he coined it in an interview with Tom Brokaw, I believe, many, many years ago. You know, in essence, it is just another game, but the game has such significance, and it's a worldwide event. And I also feel like obviously the media contributes to it, especially today, Dan. Like you and I years back would just have a telephone conversation. We wouldn't be connected with one another through Streamline or Zoom or anything else. And now everything is done instantaneously. If something happens at the Super Bowl, it's a major event right now. Whereas you go back when I was playing in them 40 and 39 years ago, it would take a Monday morning for somebody to find out what went on in the city that something was happening in. So I think the media has continued to make it very, very large, which is fine. I mean, all you need to do is take a look at Radio Row. It went from probably 100 to 500 different radio stations, TV stations around the world. So it is a major media event. There's no question. But it changes people's lives. It certainly has mine. And if you're fortunate enough to be on a team that wins a Super Bowl, it's an experience you'll never forget the rest of your life. Unfortunately, if you lose one, it's just as impactful.
Joe, for you, when you're in this game, Coach Johnson, and that's the kind of guy that I go to when it comes to his experience in both the Super Bowl and playing in college for him. What's the biggest thing you always wanted to stay away from? What do these two quarterbacks want to stay away from the most as they get ready for Sunday?
The media. I think, you're basically required.
So distractions.
Well, it isn't. The media is not a distraction. The thing is you really have to focus and schedule your time. Now, things are a little bit different now, because when we got ready for Super Bowl 17, we did not have 2 weeks. We did not have bye weeks. We came out of a strike-shortened season where we didn't play 7 football games. I think we wound up with a record of 12-1, and that was because we played 9 regular season games and then 4 playoff games because everybody was a wild card. The media is part of it. And nowadays it's a little different because you get the bye week during the course of the year. So the coaches and the players are used to having the time off, and then they're used to coming back and playing. Andy Reid has had great success after he gets 2 weeks off. And the AFC, the Kansas City Chiefs, they've been tempered coming into this Super Bowl. 2 very close games, one against Jacksonville, one against Cincinnati. On the other side, you look at the Eagles, they've cruised. When's the last time the Eagles have actually been challenged in a football game?
Joe, let me read you something here. And I was trying to tell people this, and you tell me how you read this. Here's since week 5, who the quarterbacks and offenses they've played: Josh Johnson, Brock Purdy, Daniel Jones, Davis Webb, Andy Dalton. Dak put 40 on him. Justin Fields, Daniel Jones, Tannehill, Matt Ryan, Tyler Heineke, Davis Mills, Kenny Pickett, and Cooper Rush. I mean, Joe, when I see all these numbers, And I look at some of those lines and I look at, I mean, looks like empty calories to me sometimes. So how do I look at that?
I think you bring up a very valid point for somebody who wants to bet on Kansas City, Dan, to be perfectly honest with you. But I look at it as I still think their defense is that good. Prior to the Washington game, I don't think their run defense was that good.
It wasn't.
And all of a sudden, we beat them. Well, I should say Washington beat them. They went out and got Ndamukong Suh and Lendell Joseph, neither one of which really start. And, you see the different players. I think that team has come together. I think defensively, they're going to have to rely on that football team. Jalen missed a couple of those games, didn't play. But then again, this is the Super Bowl. It's different. They've had 2 weeks to prepare. I always felt through the course of the season, it seemed like Kansas City's offense was protecting its defense a little bit, but his defense has really stepped up during the playoffs. And the big thing to me is, will Kansas City be able to control Jalen Hurts running the football? I think he'll throw the ball well. They have to get the ball to A.J. Brown. A.J. caught 3 touchdowns in one game and then almost disappeared for goodness knows how long a period of time. So I think it's a valid point that they really haven't played anyone. But then again, if you don't play someone and you struggle, that's one thing.
Right.
But I don't think all those quarterbacks you face, I don't think they had any kind of success against that Eagle defense either. That's doing a little bit deeper dive. So they were really good. They just happened to play not good opponents, and there's nothing much you could do about that. That's the big question, and that's the big thing that you have to look at. And like I said, Patrick's going to be healthy. Jalen's going to be healthy. Obviously, there's not going to be a weather element at all. The conditions will be great. I think Kansas City's wide receiving core is down some people. That's one thing that you have to consider. Patrick is magical. And will the Eagles be able to control Travis Kelce? Will you be able to?
I think that's
him from having a big impact on the game.
Absolutely. Joe, let me throw this at you too here. Do you think the Eagles are going to need more from Hurts in this game? Because if you put the two games together, average 133 yards passing, 39 yards rushing. Still, like you said, they put up 31 on San Francisco because they were a headless team. They didn't have a quarterback. I mean, McCaffrey was back there taking some snaps. Do you think they're going to – I've never seen a guy, and I've never seen a team, Joe, win an NFC championship game where the quarterback, if you take that 30-yard gift away, threw for 93 yards and that 39 yards rushing. I've never seen that. Maybe back in the early 70s. I mean – but now, in a game like today, I think they're going to need more from him.
They will, but here's the point, Dan, is that he didn't need to throw the football.
They went for 181. They went for 181 on the ground.
They had such a big lead in both those games.
Yeah,
they had such a big lead in the first half. There was no reason for him to throw. What in 2 consecutive football games, where would you think that A.J. Brown had 7 total catches?
Agreed.
And all of them, and by the way, I believe all of them in the first quarter.
Yep.
So, you have to look at that receiving core and say they're going to be impactful. Devontae Smith is a weapon. They're good enough on offense to be able to spread it around and do some things. And it's almost like, how does Kansas City prepare for the Eagles offensively when you've seen such little bit of the Eagles? I mean, really, you haven't seen a passing game out of the Eagles because they didn't need it. They just beat the living daylights out of you running the football. Well, I think this is it's going to be a different football game. One thing Kansas City's going to have to do is control the Eagles' running game. If they can control it, put it on Jalen's shoulders, which I believe he will have to be able to make plays with his arms, then all of a sudden you're sort of leveling the playing field. But if the Eagles can run the football with him and with their backs successfully, I think it keeps Patrick on the sidelines. It doesn't allow Kansas City to do the things that they like to do, put the ball in the air and move the ball down the field. So it becomes a major chess game. And I think the 2 best play callers in football are Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan. I think, I can't wait for this Super Bowl to see what Andy's going to come up with offensively as a play. Something. Joe Gibbs was exactly like that, Dan. When we got ready Saturday night for the Super Bowl, this was Super Bowl 17, we put in what was called an explode package. Actually, we put it in, that week, but Joe was excited about it. And he said, the reason why we're going to run this is, I don't know how the game's going to go. I think we're going to be okay. We just have to, we have to control the ground game. We want to get this thing into the fourth quarter where the size of our offensive line can make a difference and John can make a difference. And that's really the way it went. But he said, we put in this explode package, and he said, I'm going to call it. You know why? Because I want to hear what the announcers have to say about it. And I think Andy is the same exact type of person. I think Andy is going to do something where people on Monday, could you believe that play, or could you believe that formation? And that could be, it could be a difference in the game. It could be the creativity that they need to get over the hump. I still like the Eagles in this one because I do believe that defense makes a difference. And I'm not basing it off a couple of years ago when Tampa Bay's defense dominated the Kansas City Chief offense, because Patrick was on a leg and a half and both of their tackles were out. So I think they're going to get a full complement of the Kansas City Chiefs. And here's one other thing. And you and I just mentioned it, and you and I have talked about it. I know you've heard it. Everybody's making all this noise about the Eagle defensive line, the Eagle offensive line. They're the best two lines in football. Well, if I'm the Kansas City Chiefs defensive line and I'm the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line, I'm sick and tired of hearing people talk about the other guys. And in a day and a half or so, we're fixing to find out just how good somebody really is. And that I really think that is a subliminally big motivating factor for Kansas City on both sides of the ball.
Joe, you had one of the greatest offensive lines of all time. And like you just said, I mean, if you look at this line, the two tackles making $20 million apiece, you got a Hall of Fame center and Jason Kelce. When you go into games, how much confidence does that give you as a quarterback when you've got the best line in the National Football League? When you know that you're not see, your wide receivers, though, were so good. I mean, you guys could be finesse, but you were mostly power. And when it's almost a little bit like this Eagle team in philosophy, you could beat them deep, Joe, or you could pound the hell out of them with Riggins. I mean, talk about that a little bit when you have a group like that in front of you. What that does for a team.
Dan, AJ reminds me of Art. Big body guy. Art was a converted running back to wide receiver. Great hands, catch everything, physical, tough to deal with. And then I had Charlie Brown on the other side, which is a little bit like Devontae, a speed guy, do some certain things. And then I had the two little guys, Alvin and Virgil. And, Clint Didier, our tight end, was a special, unique individual. Donnie Warren and Doc, our other two tight ends, were something special. I think Kansas City will use a fair amount of tight end sets in this game, by the way. I think that'll be something they'll feature. They did in the last game. You think they throw
a lot of screens in this game too, Joe? Middle screens, delayed screens, and stuff like that?
Andy's going to throw screens. Dan, you and I both know that. I don't think there'll be any more than they would normally throw. I think they respect the speed of the defense on the other side and the speed of those defensive linemen. A lot of times if you want to throw a screen, you have to sort of hit somebody and release them. I don't know if they want to hit these defensive linemen and release them on Patrick in a hurry. I'd be surprised in that regard. But I agree with you to a degree. They're a little bit like we were. I mean, I used to call when I dropped in the pocket, I was in the cradle of love. Those five guys just took care of me. I think Jalen feels that kind of comfort. That's one other thing that's very interesting is I really feel like Kansas City has to make Jalen uncomfortable in the pocket. And if he does flush, he's going to run, he's going to get down, but you can't give him avenues to escape. And so it's a little bit similar with Patrick. I mean, you don't want him going in one direction or the other.
You want to set the edges, right, Joe? You want to set
what
the
you
edges.
Do is set them up, take them up as high as their drop is. The big thing with guys that can move around, and you saw this with Josh Allen when Cincinnati played him, the defensive ends rush up the field to the level of the quarterback's drop. They don't like to go past it and create that escape to the right or the left. So it places a premium on the guys up front. And let me tell you something. You're not going to have tight ends blocking these defensive ends of the Eagles. Right. I think you're kidding yourself if you're going to put somebody out there and think they're going to be able to stop them and not get run over. So you and I have covered a myriad of wonderful things. This is the chess game that's going on right now, and we're going to get a chance to see it play out in our eyes at 6:30 on Sunday. I think it's going to be a heck of a Super Bowl. Both of these teams were the number one seeds. Both of these teams deserve to be here. You know, a lot of times some people say, well, you got a Cinderella. There's no Cinderella in this one. These two went to the dance. They performed at the dance and they delivered, and now they're here for the big dance. And like I say, I think it's an exciting time, and it's fun. Like for the Eagles, it's a new experience for everybody, and you don't know what you don't know what to be afraid of because you've never been here.
That's right.
And the thing you think about with Kansas City is, we've had a number of guys have been here not just too long ago. I mean, is there a degree of complacency? I don't believe that one bit. I believe, I always think of Tom Brady, a dear friend, and you have to be hungry for every opportunity that's out there. Tom has delayed, by the way, his move into the booth till 2024, which leaves 2023 as a year open on his calendar. It doesn't make sense to me for him to try and play another year to become Michael Jordan, retire, unretire, retire, unretire. It's a little bit different with Gronk at that position because there's a learning curve that Tom would have to go through if he went to a different system, except for the Raiders at this stage, which who knows. But I really, it'll be interesting.
So you think the door's open for Brady? You think it's open in 2023?
Why would he want to start in 24 and not 23, Dan?
I get it. It doesn't make sense.
I don't know. I mean, I honest to goodness don't know. But I found it very curious that he wasn't going to start in the booth until 24. But, I mean, it's not unusual to see guys want to come back. I mean, if it's out of your system, it's out of your system. I think announcing the retirement, he's announced the retirement. It wasn't other people announcing it for him and then him, oh, by the way, saying, I'm going to do it. The aspects of his life seem to be more solidified in the direction he wants to go. And maybe he just wants a year off. My God, he's played a lot of football. Why not take a year off? Gee whiz.
Absolutely. Joe, two last questions for you. Do you think Jalen Hurts is an elite quarterback in the NFL?
I think he's working towards that. I think Patrick has become an elite quarterback. He hasn't had a chance to play that much football, enough football. He's 16-1 as a starter. Certainly does a lot of things very well. But before we dub anybody elite or great or all those other terms they like to put on the position, I still think you need to see where he fits in this particular game, and a few more years going forward. I mean, we could sit here and say, wow, Nick Foles won a world championship. Well, what have you done for me lately?
Absolutely.
And so in Jalen's case, I just love everything about him. I love his intelligence. I love it. You sense a football awareness with this young man.
Yes.
That he's very bright. He's played in different systems, and the college systems have an aptitude to him as well as the professional system. He knows how to take care of himself on the field, and the players play for him. That's one of the biggest things. Just like on the other side of the ball, those guys play for Patrick. And I think the Eagle players, they play for Jalen because they understand him and they understand his commitment to them. And so that's where these two guys are very similar.
You know what, though, Joe, here's my problem. And tell me, Joe, if you think I sound like, oh, man, get off my lawn. The game, I guess it's like the NBA. The game is so different. You can't hit. I mean, can you imagine Montana and guys like yourself? So you're telling me you can't touch Rice going down the field. You can't hit the quarterback. And these guys today played longer and put up more numbers because of a couple factors. You can't hit the quarterback, and these guys are wide open. Wide receivers have a big mouth today for a reason. You know why? There's no Ronnie Lott in the middle of the field knocking your jock into the ground. So I'm like, when I look at guys like Brady and I hear you and everyone going, wow, this guy's, and I'm like, I saw Montana do that stuff, Joe. I played against Montana. I played against all you guys. I don't see anything like Mahomes. Tell me that's not Randall Cunningham. today. You know what I mean?
Sure, Dan. I mean, it's a different game today.
I know I sound like an old guy. I mean, I'm
what you've done is you've analyzed the situation, but I sort of look at where we are today with the rules. I think the wide receiving corps is the most undisciplined group of players in the league today because they don't get hit, but yet I think they're the most outstanding when it comes to the athleticism and the catches that they made. So on one side, it's like, yeah, you guys after 5 yards can't get touched. On the other side, gosh, you're doing some unbelievable stuff catching the football. I mean, just the one-handed catches and the just all over the place, all the catches they make. I think the one thing about Joe's situation and mine in Washington, there was a nucleus of players that stayed together over quite a period of time. In San Francisco, when Joe was there, it was basically the same group. What makes Tom so unique is there's been an ever-changing presence around him on a team. It was the same way in Tampa, went to a new team. It was the same way in New England. I challenge people this all the time. Name me 3 wide receivers, and don't go slot guys, Wes Welker and Danny Amendola. Don't go to slot guys. Name me 3 wide receivers besides Randy Moss that have played for the New England Patriots.
They're dudes. Deion Branch, a Troy Brown. I mean, Chris
Troy was a slot guy. Troy was a slot guy again.
I mean, Joe, he had a bunch of Jimmys and Joes,
and a Tom,
and a Tom, and a Tom. But like I said, I mean,
Tom was right there, just doing his thing in the middle of it all. And
can you imagine this, Joe? He only played with one Hall of Fame player as a skilled player that's going to the Hall of Fame in his 20 years in New England, and that's Gronkowski. The rest of those guys were dudes. Amendola's not going anywhere. He was a great postseason guy. Edelman,
Randy's
too.
The other one. I think Randy, Randy had.
Yeah, but he didn't win a Super Bowl with him.
No, but that team was, you talk about great teams. And this is another thing, Dan, it's interesting. You talk about that New England team when Tom threw 50 and Randy caught 23. It went 18-1. They lose to the Giants. I believe that was the year. Nobody talks about that. They talk about Eli Manning winning world championship. They don't talk about how great that team was, which tells you about the significance of the Super Bowl. I do presentations all the time, and I challenge the people in the room to tell me what the winning purse is of the Super Bowl. I can speak to an audience of 300. No one knows because the dollars don't amount to anything. It's being able to wear that ring and be able to be called a world champion that matters so much. And that's what these guys have at stake. And so even though New England had a great, great year, outstanding year, they lost. They're an afterthought to a degree, but the team that won is the one that people remember.
Hey, Joe, for you, do you remember the Super Bowl win more, or do you remember the Super Bowl loss more the following year?
What a great question. I've gone through this on a number of occasions. I remember the things that I did poorly in Super Bowl 18 more than I remember the things that we did well in Super Bowl 17, although I do remember knocking the ball away from Kim Bocamper. Preventing the interception that really, I think, would have cinched the game for them and made it difficult for us. I get a chance to remember it when here during Super Bowl week, they replay the Super Bowls and I get a chance to see our Super Bowls. But I reflect back on the things I could have done better. But there are some great memories from Super Bowl 17. One is watching John run down the field and chasing him and yelling at Clint Didier, don't clip anybody. Don't clip anybody. Just let them go. They're not going to catch them. And then, knocking the ball away from Kim and sitting in the end zone and looking at him and going, that was close.
Joe, I thought that team was better. I thought the team the next year was actually better than the team that beat the Dolphins in the Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah. No question. I mean, we lost 2 games that year by 1 point. We were 16-2 going into the Super Bowl. We lose, I think, 31-30 to the Cowboys, 48-47 to the Packers. We scored 541 points, Dan. Our giveaway takeaway ratio, if anybody's listening out there and you want to have some fun, look up over the last 10 years what the giveaway takeaway ratio was for the leading team in the National Football League. We were plus 43.
That's crazy.
Nuts. It's nuts.
That's absolutely crazy. Joe, those teams were so good. And do you think when you look back at a guy like Coach Gibbs, I say, because, Kyle Shanahan, it reminded me a little bit when he had to go through all the quarterbacks this year, and they were going like, oh, my God, Kyle Shanahan had 4 different quarterbacks. I'm like, Gibbs won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different dudes.
Yep.
I mean, I don't think that's emphasized enough when we bring up the greatest coaches of all time, Joe.
Really, all of us with a little bit different skill sets. Dougie was basically, a guy in the back of in the pocket. Rip was pretty much a pocket guy. We moved me a little bit more, but it shows, and I don't use this term lightly, it shows Joe's genius of being able to adapt to the players that he has on the field. Too often coaches try to fit square pegs into round holes.
Right on.
Hey, just take what you got, look at the talent of that individual, and develop it. I'll give you a classic example. I think Justin Fields has a chance to be a pretty darn good young quarterback if he learns how to throw the ball correctly. Who's going to teach him in Chicago what to do with the football when he has it in his hand other than running?
They haven't had a quarterback since Sid Luckman. I mean,
I just played in a shootout with Jimmy Mack. He was pretty much fun.
He was probably their best winning guy that they've ever had here. Joe, I'm going to leave you with this. A friend of mine, and I know a dear friend of yours, passed away, and Bobby Beathard. And I had Coach I had Bobby on, I would say 2 years ago, and he was body surfing because he was this body surfing dude. He loved to, he goes, I'll do the interview, but I've got to body surf. I'm like, you're 100 years old and your body's, he goes,
never
stop. Body surfing the whole time when I got to San Diego and became the GM. And I'm going like, this guy lived such a great life. People forget the Kansas City, the Miami, and obviously what he did with you. But just the thought on what Beathard meant to that run of you guys, that you guys won all them Super Bowls with him as the general manager.
He meant everything, Dan. I mean, Joe, we wound up with Joe because of Dan.
Huh.
And then that draft, I think the 81 draft, I think we had 5 starters come out of. Then the next year, I think we got Darryl Green. I mean, his ability to find talent. First rounders are first rounders, okay? Your eyes tell you about them. But to be able to draft in the 6th and 7th rounds and, later rounds back then, because we had more, Bobby could find, gems everywhere. He found Gary Clark. He found all these different players that we had, Darryl Grant. He found guys that were impact players for us, and that was Bobby's talent. I was with Bobby's wife, I believe, I'm trying to think which Super Bowl it was at. Might have been San Diego or somewhere. And she had said, I wish Bobby was at a point in his life where he could really appreciate, understand the impact that he had and the great honor that he's receiving going into the Hall of Fame. And, he'd reached a point where it became a little tougher for him to process things. And he was a friend. I got to tell you one quick story. So I was up in New York doing something, and Bobby and I were flying back on a plane. And he said to me, Joe, he says, I got some incredible receivers. This was like, I think 84. He says, I found some really great guys, Malcolm Muhammad and Calvin Muhammad and Malcolm Bardwell, Raider guys. He said, one's tough, the other's fast. And I thought, wow, this is great. Well, Malcolm didn't really fit into the system that well with us. And Calvin used to jump for every pass that was ever thrown to him. and so I sat with Bobby one day and I said, they're nice guys, but wow. He said, well, Joe, you just got to work with them. I said, okay, I'll do whatever you want, Bobby. I got no problem doing that, buddy. But it was he was a special guy, a special friend. And you're right. I mean, I'll never forget Wednesday afternoon, Mr. Cook, they put 3 chairs out Wednesday afternoon, one for Coach Gibbs, one for Bobby Beathard, and one for Mr. Cook. Joe would be, he'd have his whistle and he'd have his coaching uniform on. Mr. Cook would come out dressed with his ascot and looking impeccable. Bobby would sit there with his sandals and his surfing shorts and his hat and his shirt on. So they were 3 different individuals that really had a great impact on that franchise.
I want to ask you this last question because I saw this and someone, when I told them I was having you on, and someone in Miami brought this up to me. Did you ever wonder that maybe you were supposed to take over for Bob Greasy and play for Don Shula. You would have been the heir apparent to Greasy and that great football team. And you would have played not only, look at the luck. So luck of the Irish, you played at Notre Dame. You have to go to Canada, but then all of a sudden there's a first rounder was given to the Dolphins because of the property rights for you. And I'm just wondering, Joe, did you ever think that maybe you, instead of playing for a Hall of Fame coach in Joe Gibbs, you're playing for a Hall of Fame coach in Don Shula? You ever think of that?
I have, Dan, and it's sort of funny. I'm not a rear view mirror guy. I look to the past for education and knowledge to try and grow and learn. I'm a windshield guy. I like to see what's out in front of me. But when I think of that, the time I spent in Canada, 71, 72, and 73, I guess you could say they were pretty good years for the Miami Dolphins. But here's my analogy to all the Miami Dolphin fans that are listening now, okay? People don't realize that the 1972 undefeated Miami Dolphin football team, of which theoretically I would have been the quarterback for 9 games, just as Earl Morrall was, okay?
That's right.
9 games. But look at it this way. Because I didn't go to Miami, Coach Shula went and got Earl from Baltimore. Earl Morrall quarterbacked 9 of those games during the undefeated season. Could I have done that? I don't know. So I simply say this to all of the Dolphin fans. You're welcome for not having me go to Miami.
And I tell folks about that team, and you keep telling me how great other teams were. I'm like, so wait a minute. That team was not just good like the 85 Bears. That team won 3 AFC titles, 2 Super Bowls, and one of them is undefeated. I don't know, Joe.
Yeah.
That's a heck of a run there, man. And you're in Canada.
It was, hey, and I managed to go to the Grey Cup 1 year up in Canada. That's right. And then, I got my first broken leg in Canada. So it was, 2 Super Bowls, AFC Championship games, broken leg, Grey Cup. But to be honest with you, Dan, I wouldn't trade the experience of having gone to Canada and played up there. By the way, for all of those that are watching that are Canadian football fans, I'm sure there are some.
I played in Canada.
The Argos won the Grey Cup this year. So that was, I don't know, it's like our 5th or 6th. So it was a great experience for me. And like I said, Coach Shula George gave up a number 1 to bring me to Washington. So I ultimately became a first-round pick.
Absolutely. That's correct. That's exactly right. Hey, Joe, it's always great catching up with you, man. You're like the encyclopedia, plus your great broadcasting career that you had in the National Football League. Enjoy the game Sunday. It is always a privilege to catch up with you, and you're a dear friend. Thank you so much, Joe.
You bet, Dan. Take care. And everybody, please stay safe.
Former National Football League Hall of Fame, MVP, and also the owner of 2 NFC championships. We really appreciate that. Please hit the like button. Keep it here on the National Football Show.
When it comes to the fight against insurance companies, large corporations, and the healthcare industry, injured victims are always the underdog. But that doesn't worry us. At Messa & Associates, we're an injury law firm from Philadelphia, and we come to fight. Our clients know that they've got representation with a chip on its shoulder, and it's the same chip that makes Philly the toughest city in the country. Call 215-568-3500 or visit us online at messalaw.com. Messa & Associates, the toughest injury firm in Philadelphia.
Post-game show with